No one would have expected that the issue of the settlement agreement with Japan would come up at the time of discussing the demolition of the MT Kumgang tourist facility. For this reason, everyone in the meeting room, both North and South Korea, had complicated and subtle expressions on their faces. Vice Chairman Ri Hae-ryong and the North Korean delegates, who were about to leave the meeting room, were seated again. He still had a hard expression on his face, but it was clear that his ears were wide open. And the same goes for South Korean representatives, including the Minister of Unification. Everyone is looking at me with curious eyes. Even when I was educated in the military that North Korea is bad guys, I never imagined that the day would come when I would get attention at the inter-Korean ministerial level meeting. Anyway, I kept saying, in the past, Japan invaded many countries in Asia, including Joseon, and paid compensation for them after the war. At that time, South Korea received only $600 million, including loans and private support. This is less than even the Philippines, which received $800 million. It's an unbelievable amount of money for being expropriated under colonial rule for over 30 years. Of course, that money helped tremendously with the post-war economic revival. That is, the seed money of $600 million was multiplied by 100 times. That doesn't change the fact that I got less. What's even more absurd is that these are not reparations but grants and loans. The Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Myanmar are the only 4 countries that Japan actually paid in the name of reparations. It may have been best at the time, but the problems with this agreement continue to this day. Contrary to South Korea's position that only the issue of reparation between countries has been resolved, Japan's position is that everything is over with this agreement. Therefore, it is rather shameless to say that there is no more apology or compensation. The expression on the faces of the people in the government side was not very good when they pointed out the faults of the Korean government. But what if it's true? I didn't care and kept talking. Since we can't undo what has already been done, shouldn't North Korea receive it properly? Japan seems to be thinking up to $20 billion, but I think it should be at least $70 billion. In other words, it means that we will fry it 3 times more. Even though the unit eye roll is getting bigger these days, billion is really a ridiculous amount. Especially considering North Korea's GDP. Even taking into account the inflation rate, it is 10 times more than the compensation received by Korea. Vice Chairman Ri Hae-ryong looked skeptical. Do you think that would be possible? We have to make it possible. It's natural to not believe it. I probably wouldn't have believed it if it wasn't for wisdom. This is the prediction I saw. Realistically, it is unlikely that the amount will suddenly jump like this. Besides, it's not a grant, it's a restitution. Paying money in the name of reparation is like reversing Japan's existing position as it acknowledges an act of aggression against Joseon. How is this possible? Therefore, it can only be seen that a variable that did not exist before intervened. What are the factors that could make Japan receive a large amount of compensation and even an apology? No matter how much I think about it, it's only me, isn't it? Vice Chairman Ri Hae-ryong maintains a sober expression, but in his head he must be pounding the calculator fiercely. Politics doesn't end with words, it's something someone has to take responsibility for. If you believe in my words and proceed with the negotiation, if it doesn't go well, it will be difficult for him to retain his position. I'd have to be so careful. The same goes for the economy. If the negotiated amount does not reach $70 billion, OTK company will cut off all future transactions with Japan. If this is enough, I think I am prepared to take responsibility. There was silence in the conference room for a while. As if they were fighting a spirit, everyone stood still without a single posture or expression disturbed. Except for Taekyu, who was yawning next to him. If you're sleepy, just go home. In the end, Vice Chairman Ri Hae-ryong broke the silence first and opened his mouth. What are the demands of the South? Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon said while coughing. First, I would like to withdraw the request for removal of the MT Kumgang facility. He nodded his head politely. I will try to convince the chairman about that. You have gained momentum, but what are you hoping for so simple? The chairman said that he was dissatisfied with the old facilities. So how about resuming the tour of MT Jumgang with a modern refurbishment? President Han Byung-sun quickly responded to my words. I think it would be nice to do that too. The resumption of MT Jumgang tourism is nothing less than Yunsong Jumgang's longing. I went on to say. And I would like to proceed with the railway and gas pipeline business in connection with the Rajan Hassan project, which was discussed in Vladivostok the other day. I think it is a project that will be of great help to both Koreas and Russia. As if he didn't know that the story would suddenly progress so quickly, there was a look of embarrassment in the eyes of Vice Chairman Ri Hae-ryong. Originally, the agenda for this meeting was the MT Jumgang facility. But that problem was no longer in my mind. How much money should I make when tourism resumes? What has become important now is the claim to Japan and the railway and gas pipeline projects. You may have already noticed that I'm trying to tie these two together. North Korea is doing its best to call for self-reliance, but everyone knows that its foreign currency is almost depleted. In this situation, economic cooperation and the right to claim against Japan are both appealing to North Korea. I looked at my partner and said, again, billion in damages. I think the blood of the people is heavier than 1,000 gold. What do you think of the vice chairman? Vice Chairman Ri Hae-ryong did not say anything. A light of conflict flashed across his face. He probably didn't know that he would receive such an offer when he came out to press the South. It's like, Jenga is trying to buy me with money. You mean insulting me? I want to shout, but Taekyu still yawned and muttered in a low voice. It was too much money to scold. Negotiations on the first day ended there. We got back in the car and drove back to Seoul. As it turns out, it is just a short drive from Panmunjom to Seoul. The fact that North Korea is so close comes to mind. If there was a real war, it would be a big deal. When I searched on my phone, various articles were already pouring in. The tone differed sharply according to political orientation. Foreign media were also deeply interested in this inter-Korean summit. However, everyone is only arguing over the possibility of demolishing the MT Kumgang facility and resuming tourism. No one would have thought that the right to claim against Japan and the railroad and gas pipeline business would have been talked about here. After returning to Seoul, I couldn't go home right away. Foreign Minister Kim Song-cheol joined the meeting, and the meeting continued until late at night at the government building. Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon asked, "Did you intend to bring up the right to claim against Japan from the beginning?" "Yes," he said as if frustrated. "Didn't you say something in advance?" The government is not stupid. It was closely watching the North Korea-Japan claims agreement. It was just that the Korean government kept its mouth shut as it was not a matter of interfering. South Korea and Russia have long hoped to build a gas pipeline and railroad, but the project did not proceed because they did not trust the North Korean side. At a dinner in Vladivostok, it was said that supreme dignity should guarantee the progress of business, but in fact, it is true that it is not reassuring by itself. It is because North Korea is overturning even interstate negotiations with a single word of the highest dignity. Even the demolition of the MT Jumgang facility, which is now a problem, didn't it start with a single word of supreme dignity? Negotiation for the right to claim with Japan will serve as a safety device for the progress of the project. The claims agreement is not something that can be finished overnight. Since there is a big difference in the amount, it will take several years even if the negotiations start now. Enough time for South Korea and Russia to complete the construction of railroads and gas pipelines in North Korea. In the meantime, if North Korea breaks down its business again because of a threat to the regime, then it is enough for me to withdraw. Then North Korea will lose $50 billion. Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon said, "North Korea is not afraid of its own harm. If North Korea had pursued its interests, it would have opened up sooner and developed its economy. The reason North Korea has overturned economic cooperation several times so far is because it feared that attracting foreign capital would itself be seen as a failure of the regime. However, the right to claim against Japan is a different story. Human psychology is a strange thing, so you can turn down $50 billion from others depending on your mood. If you think it's someone else's money anyway, there's nothing to be sad about. But if it's the money they deserve, they think differently. As North Korea receives the money it deserves, there is no problem with the stability of the regime. Rather, getting more money is a way to promote the regime's legitimacy. The pictures are pretty good too. From the North's point of view, it can take the form of using South Korea to pressure Japan rather than unilaterally receiving aid from Russia and South Korea. Taejae said, "If we get a lot of compensation and apologies that can't be compared with Korea, we will be able to promote it as the leader's achievements. I don't think it's a bad thing for Korea either." Regardless of liberals and conservatives, South Korea wants North Korea to give up its nuclear program and engage in economic development. However, economic development requires money and has to pay bills somewhere. Read more at wuxiax.com. The country that has to pay the most on this bill is Korea. Therefore, it is in South Korea's interest for North Korea to receive maximum compensation from Japan. The inter-Korean issue is not just a problem between the two countries, but the interests of neighboring countries are sharply intertwined. If you look at only the related powers the US, China, Russia, and Japan are. Minister of Foreign Affairs Kim Song-cheol said, "This issue requires close consultation with the United States. I have already told President Ronald." Everyone looked at me in disbelief. Who can have a conversation like this directly with the President of the United States? The United States offered North Korea a guarantee of regime stability and economic development in return for giving up its nuclear weapons. But who is Ronald? He made an offer, but had no intention of spending a penny of American money. President Ronald said openly that economic aid to North Korea should not come from the United States, but from South Korea, Japan, and China, and that Japan is very interested in investment. Japan expressed displeasure at this. If the amount of claims increases significantly, the Japanese side will lobby the Washington government, but as long as I am involved, the United States will not be able to organize traffic for Japan. The Russian side. The last time I met President Vysotsky, we talked about this issue, and I will tell you again about the progress. As you know, President Vysotsky wants to break free from Western sanctions and make Vladivostok the central city of the Far East. As you desperately want this project to happen, I think you will naturally support my position. Government officials were again at a loss for words. I am probably the only person who can have direct contact with the Russian president. Either way, the US and Russia agree. China will not welcome it, but it will not oppose it either. The problem is Japan, where it stayed still and was beaten. Minister of Foreign Affairs Kim Song-cheol said cautiously, "Japan will not stand still. We will protest vigorously diplomatically against the Korean government, and maybe even take retaliation like last time." In international law, South Korea and North Korea are completely different countries. If South Korea is involved in negotiations between Japan and North Korea, it is highly likely that this will become a diplomatic issue. Therefore, South Korea has refrained from commenting on this issue. What does that matter? I am just an investor. Taekyu nodded next to him. Well then, there is only one citizen who does not listen to the dirty words and is behaving in his own way. Foreign Minister Kim Song-cheol said as he wiped the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Even so, the Japanese side will strongly demand that the Korean government sanction the representative's actions. I nodded. Then you will do it. But when did I ever hear from the government? The Inter-Korean summit was a global concern. After the first day of the meeting, questions from domestic and foreign media poured in, but government officials kept their mouths shut. Me, Taekyu, and Han Byung-sun, president of Yunseongjeomgang, also did not respond to any interview. The reason I was more interested compared to the previous meeting was because I attended. Everyone was keen to see what the outcome would be. The negative outlook prevailed. In particular, Japanese media such as NHK and the Sankei Shimbun reported the breakdown of the talks as if they were established facts. Taekyu said in the car on the way home. They seem to be desperately waiting for a breakup. That's the Japanese wind. Prime Minister Okazaki has ambitions to break away from his image of a war criminal country and make Japan a normal country. In order to do this, the peace constitution, which forbids holding an army and engaging in warfare, must first be abolished. For this reason, Japan made a fuss whenever North Korea conducted a missile test, emphasizing that Japan's security was being threatened. You wouldn't want inter-Korean relations to improve as much as you want to continue to maintain a hostile symbiotic relationship. It was almost midnight when I got home. Ellie in pajamas greeted us. I wasn't sleeping, she said. I was watching the TV debate. When I glanced at the TV, lawmakers from the ruling and opposition parties appeared on the panel and had a heated discussion. When it comes to North Korea, they seem to have a lot to talk about. How was the meeting? Taekyu explained what happened at the meeting, and Ellie couldn't hide his surprise. $70 billion in claims against Japan? No way. Do you think Jinhu will be able to afford that amount? That's... Taekyu said in a voice like he was about to collapse. I want to eat some rice first. I haven't eaten anything since lunch because of the talks and meetings going on. Ellie raised her hand. I want to eat too. We poured water on the cup noodles and sat around the living room together. I wonder if the diet is too simple compared to the wealth. While waiting for the ramen to cook, we talked. The gas pipeline construction and railway connection project will have a big economic effect, right? Of course. It will probably change the relationship between the two Koreas completely in the future. First, Korea, which relies entirely on foreign fossil fuels, can receive Siberian natural gas cheaply and stably. North Korea will also be able to greatly reduce its dependence on China for energy through gas pipelines. It is the railroad that has a bigger effect than that. Transportation infrastructure is the cornerstone of the industry. Once the railroad is connected, Korea, which has been nothing but an island country, will have a foothold to expand into the Eurasian continent. Road transport can significantly reduce time compared to sea transport. Products produced in Korea can be sent to Russia and Europe via rail and vice versa. North Korea doesn't end with just charging tolls. If I had an idea, I would build an industrial complex in the area where the railroad passes. Rosatom even thought about building a TWR along the east coast. Since it is a small reactor, the construction period is short, and it can be built as needed in the required area. Ellie opened the lid of the cup noodles and asked, "But what if we eat everything from above even if we receive compensation?" Indeed, in the case of underdeveloped countries, it is not uncommon for politicians and bureaucrats to harm even international aid from NGOs. There is nothing to worry about. North Korea is a rogue state recognized by the world, so the international community will monitor the money received as reparations from being diverted to nuclear or weapons development. Taekyu stirs the noodles with his chopsticks. Still, those who will harm you will not harm you, will you? That's right. Well, if you're going to get hurt anyway, wouldn't it be better to get hurt at billion than to get hurt at billion? Assuming that supreme dignity and the humans around it are harmed by 20% each, the former leaves $16 billion and the latter $56 billion. And more than half will be given in kind. Even $20 billion is a burden. If the $50 billion increase here, even if it is paid in installments over 10 or 20 years, the burden is not too high. Therefore, more than half of them will be received in kind, such as materials, parts, machinery, and food, and this will inevitably be used for economic development. Ellie tilted her head. Can you afford this amount in Japan's current financial situation? Currently, Japan's GDP ranks third in the world. The national budget is also the third largest in the world as it is proportional to the size of GDP, and the amount is almost 2 trillion yen. However, much of the tax already exists, and the amount of additional money that can be used is limited. In addition, Japan is running a deficit finance that spends a lot of money compared to the tax it collects every year. As a result, the accumulated deficit is at an astronomical level. Currently, Japan's national debt exceeds 1,100 trillion yen. This is the highest among all countries and is more than double Japan's GDP. Taekyu rubbed his eyes and asked. Then it doesn't matter if you increase it by 7 trillion yen more. The debt is 1,100 trillion yen, or 1107 trillion yen. It's not wrong, but how's this different from saying it's okay to get one more shot at someone who's been beaten to death? It will be a crazy burden for Japan, which is already sitting on a pile of debt. However, that is the case in Japan. Again, Japan is the third largest economy in the world. And North Korea is one of the poorest countries in the world. It boasts a level of poverty that is comparable to that of African countries suffering from civil war. It's not that the mouse thinks of the cat. Well, there is no need to worry about their circumstances. It's not that I'm asking for money that I don't have, it's that I'm compensated for what I've suffered in the past. Taekyu rubbed his face and nodded his head. A common enemy is bound to be of great help to cooperation. Another meeting was held at Panmunjom. It was a much more friendly atmosphere compared to yesterday. Vice Chairman Ri Hae-ryong, who shook my hand and grabbed my hand, felt warm. The same goes for North Korea, that went back and held a meeting. To come back to the meeting point means that the highest dignity has accepted my proposal. Vice Chairman Ri Hae-ryong said. Chairman said that he sympathizes with the opinion of CEO Kong Jin-woo, who thinks about the future of our people. But he was concerned about how he could change Japan's position. The claims agreement with Japan was being negotiated at about $10 to $20 billion. Of course, the more money you get, the better. Why would you not want to receive more money from North Korea? However, considering the relationship between North Korea and Japan, equity with other countries that have already received compensation, and the power of North Korea and Japan, it would have been judged that more than that was unreasonable. Well, even this is a huge amount for North Korea. But now that I have offered to raise the amount to more than $50 billion, I have no choice but to be interested. As I said, money is money. But shouldn't a sincere apology for colonial rule and war crimes come first? It's worse than not making the wrong agreement. North Korea intends to obtain a clear apology by discussing the issue of forced labor and the comfort women from the beginning, so that something similar to that of South Korea does not happen. Japan's intention is to quietly conclude the claims agreement with Japan if possible. But if I step in, the matter will be international news. Whether Japan admits it or not, various war crimes committed by Japan throughout the negotiation process will become a global issue. This will be of great help in eradicating the mistakes of the past and deterring Japan's efforts to build up its arms, and in strengthening North Korea's position in the international community. Vice Chairman Ri Hae-ryong looked at me and asked, no matter how good a plan is, isn't it important that it be realized? If things go wrong, you can blame me for everything. I smiled and added, but have you ever failed in anything I've ever done? In this case, your reputation as an investor will be of great help. Following my story, Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon announced plans to resume tourism to MT Jumgang and to build gas pipelines and railroads through cooperation between South and North Korea. The meeting continued until the third day. Now it's a friendly atmosphere, like meeting an adult in a neighborhood. We chatted over coffee and tea together. Taekyu's hand moved busily. Stop eating chocolate pie. What kind of North Korean worker are you? The important discussion was already over on the second day. In today's meeting, there were talks about future inter-Korean exchanges and cooperation. Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon brought up the story he had been preparing for. He said, the president asked me to convey that he would like the reunion of separated families to be a top priority. As you know, all the survivors are old, so we have little time left. Vice Chairman Lee Hae-ryong nodded his head. We will review and respond to that quickly. You can expect a positive response, as the chairman agreed to it at the last Inter-Korean summit. In addition to private sports and cultural exchanges, there was also talk of a joint position at the Olympics and a unified South and North Korean team. The atmosphere is getting out of hand. Money enriches human relationships. That's why people have to have a lot of money. Towards the end of the meeting, Vice Chairman Ri Hae-ryong spoke to me personally. I think this event will increase the number of exchanges between the North and the South. The chairman said that he would like to meet him once, so why not visit our republic in the future? The supreme dignity of North Korea wants to meet me? I was reminded of a man in his 30s with a belly that often appears on the news. He's not much older than me, but he's already made a name for himself as the world's worst dictator. At the very least, the CCP has grown the economy, which is a reason to justify the system. But North Korea is not like that. It's not as bad as it was during the arduous march, but the situation is still so bad that we have to worry about making a living. I don't think it's going to be easy to shut down the economy like this, even if we are determined and put our best effort into it. I'm a bit curious as to what you're thinking. I nodded willingly. We will visit North Korea as soon as we have the opportunity. Read more at wuxiax.com. After the end of the meeting, Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon and Vice Chairman Ri Hae-ryong released photos and videos shaking hands, and a spokesperson for the Ministry of Unification briefed the press. The inter-Korean representatives have reached an agreement on the above issues, and we plan to hold an inter-Korean summit as soon as possible. Immediately, articles from domestic and foreign media poured in. Breaking news: North Korea accepts South's request and puts it on hold to demolish the MT. As there is a safety concern, permission of the person in charge to inspect the facility. Chairman Kim: if not demolished, the South takes responsibility and instructs to repair it as soon as possible. Is there a way to resume tourism to MT Kumgong? North and South Korea's request is accepted and separated family reunions are promoted within the year. What is the decisive reason for North Korea to change its attitude? The Pink Lady, who appeared on the Chosun Central TV News, delivered the words of supreme dignity. Chairman Kyung-ae pointed out that the appearance of the facilities on MT Kumgong was old and ugly, and said that if they are not to be demolished, they should be repaired as soon as possible to protect the spiritual mountain of the nation. He instructed them to submit a plan, and the South also agreed to respond. If the building is not going to be used, there is no need to repair it. Therefore, it was practically a signal for the resumption of tourism to MT Jumgang. There was also talk that the Jumgangsan facility could be used as a reunion place for separated families. This was even more positive news for the resumption of tourism. Yunsong Jumgang and officials from the Korea Tourism Organization decided to immediately set up an inspection team to visit North Korea. Shares of North Korea-related stocks and Unsung Group stocks jumped sharply on anticipation for the resumption of MT Kumgong tourism and future inter-Korean economic cooperation, and some companies hit their upper limits. Wow. Did Jin Ho Kong make something that wasn't possible? Tired. What the hell did you do? Jin-ho. Are you so deceived and deceived? But how did you do it? Have you ever poked back money in North Korea? After all, this was a jongbuk. Lick the asshole of the best bastard. When is it after a strong earthquake? He has a taste now. How much money are you worried about after the earthquake? Do you earn 200 a month? If the general hits you in the head and throws money away, you will remember the lyrics of the Torch of Destruction that you forgot after being discharged from the army. The OTK company didn't put any money into MT Kumgong, so what else is there to do other than blow it up? Many people were surprised by the unexpected result. Opposition parties and conservative A-tubes, who were pouring out criticism for saying that it was a meeting for the sake of a meeting, were at a loss for words. Inter-Korean relations, which had been blocked for a long time, seemed to be opened in an instant. But there was something else that really surprised me. I contacted President Vysotsky. When I explained what had happened at the meeting as if it were a report, President Vysotsky burst into laughter. Haha. You said you'd find a way, and you've definitely found it. Very well done. I'm glad you're satisfied too. It seems that the gas pipeline and railroad projects should proceed in the previously agreed upon direction. But I have a favor to ask you about this. Something? Let me tell you. President Vysotsky, who heard me, did not easily answer. Investment in North Korea will be strongly opposed by domestic politicians. We need Russia's help to convince the conservatives. This is quite burdensome for us as well. If things go wrong, I will also have to bear the political risk. If things go wrong, then I will take responsibility in one way or another. The gas pipeline and railway connection is a project that costs 10 trillion won even if it is small. And this is an amount that is burdensome for both Korea and Russia. But this is enough for me to handle. Looking at you saying that, it seems that you are quite confident in this matter. Can I really trust Chairman Kim? Trust me, not Chairman Kim. How do I know when and how the supreme dignity mind will change? Nevertheless, the reason I am so sure is because I have seen foreknowledge. Yeji has shown that North Korea will surely get $70 billion in compensation from Japan, and it won't go bankrupt until it receives the money. After a while, President Vysotsky said, "Hey, I will do that. Thank you. I will repay you with good results as much as you believed in me." He let out a wild laugh. Haha. No burden. Later we go to Siberia to hunt brown bears together. Do you know how to handle guns? I shot it in the military. I've never caught a brown bear. Breaking news. North Korea-Russia emergency summit held. 3 days later, President Vysotsky meets Chairman Kim in Vladivostok. Discussion of gas pipeline and railroad projects in connection with the Rajan Hassan project. Chairman Kim is known to have directly ordered the project. The long-distance railroad on the Korean peninsula, economic effect. The official announcement was made by Russia, and North Korea confirmed it through official diplomatic channels. When the talks that started with North Korea's unilateral claim to demolish the MT Kumgang facility led to a gas pipeline and railroad connection project in just a few days, people could not hide their surprise. What? Are you really building gas pipelines and railroads? No, why is the story going this way all of a sudden? Haha, this looks like Kang Jin-ho did something at the conference room. Wow. Did Jin-ho Kang even do something like this? What the hell did you do to make it impossible? Will you stick money on the top of the people's clothes? Is it possible that the supreme dignity gave a guarantee, as Kang Jin-ho said? If the supreme dignity is guaranteed, how do you believe it? This time, only the rims will ring. One vote for the end. I think it will be a little different this time. Different horns. The North-South Railway Connection project was already talked about more than 10 years ago. It was pursued whenever progressive forces took power, and detailed plans were presented several times. But what about the result? Every time I couldn't even open the first shovel and it fell over. The cost wouldn't be a joke. It makes sense to connect the North-South Railroad, but the North Korean railroads are now seriously aging, so they have to be torn down and reinstalled. That's a national tax. Changmina. Will you spread again? Take care of the people. Jin-ho. Get me a job at an OTK company. According to a domestic opinion poll, the opinion in favor of it was predominantly in favor of it by about 6-4. Rather than opposing the project itself, the opposing party cited reasons such as, "I can't trust North Korea. There is a risk that the construction investment will be diverted to the development of nuclear weapons, and inter-Korean economic cooperation is still too early." President Ha Chong-min released a statement to the public. The Iron Horse will run again. Connecting with Eurasia via rail will open up a new world. Now the Korean peninsula will be on the road to peace and prosperity. When Taekyu heard the story of President Vysotsky, he was excited. Oh. Brown bear hunt. I was also a special marksman in the army. Any man who's ever shot a gun is bound to make that mistake at least once. By the way, weren't you in the public interest? Do you know that the public interest doesn't shoot in training camps? Apologize to the public interest nationwide. My nickname in training camp was Ozily Zachev. I want to see if I can say this in front of a brown bear. Hyunju Nuna, who was listening to our conversation, let out a long sigh. Now to North Korea. Are you really sure? Taejayu said. Then, as this time it will be real. In a few years my sister will also be traveling to Europe by train. Even now I'm still doing well on the plane. Hyunju Nuna looked like she had no energy to dry anymore. What do you think, sister? Do you think it will be economical? My sister nodded her head at my question. It's economical enough. Connecting to Europe through North Korea is nothing less than a logistics innovation. Since the last Japanese trade sanctions, Korean companies have reduced their dealings with Japanese companies and actively increased their trade with European companies. When the Trans-Korean Railway is connected, it is again connected to the East-West Railway network in South Korea. Automobiles produced in Simanjeom can be sent all over Europe in 20 days, and parts produced in Europe can be brought to Simanjeom in 20 days. It will be of great help to the logistics and transportation of companies and factories to be built in Simanjeom in the future. You see, Russia uses a wide gauge that is wider than the standard gauge. Taeyong nodded his head. Of course you know. Because of that, during the German War, rail transport was not properly done, so Germany suffered quite a bit. I looked at Taekyu with surprised eyes. I know. Hey, it's all about war games. Hyunju Nuna didn't care and continued talking. So, in the Nijin Hassan section, we installed a dual gauge that both trains can travel through. If you are sending goods from Ulsan to Europe, you have to transport your luggage on a Russian train when passing through Russian territory, and then move your luggage again on the European section. There are several ways to solve this problem. Replacing all Siberian railway sections with dual gauges, or making a variable gauge train that can run on both standard and wide gauges, or changing the gauges whenever the railroad changes. It's a bit annoying, but technically it's not that difficult. It is a political problem rather than a technical problem to solve. First the opposition party will oppose it, then Japan will oppose it. Now Japan can't even imagine that bills will fly in front of them. When you find out about this, you can roughly guess how you will react. I smiled and nodded. Isn't it necessary to redefine Korea-Japan relations using this opportunity? In general, conservatives and progressives tend to confront each other over economic policies. However, the most acute conflict between conservatives and progressives in South Korea is North Korea policy. The opposition party launched an offensive in the National Assembly, while holding an out-of-the-way rally condemning the government and North Korea to rally the conservative forces. Tens of thousands of conservative groups gathered in front of Daehaemun Gate, and Seo Yun Nak-young, who stood on the podium, shouted while holding a microphone. The Heo Chongmin regime destroyed people's livelihoods, but also inter-Korean relations. Korea-Japan relations broke down, and the ROKS alliance was broken too. Even so, the president and the ruling party are claiming to be North Korea, looking only at North Korea. The facilities on Mt. Jumgang are the private property of our people. The government cannot protect the property rights of the people. Shouldn't you and I be judged? However, an unexpected reversal occurred. Suddenly, there was talk of resuming tourism to Mt. Jumgang and reunions of separated families. And now there are gas pipelines and railroad connection projects in which South and North Korea cooperate. The worst inter-Korean relations crisis turned into the greatest inter-Korean economic cooperation in an instant. The approval ratings of the president and the ruling party rose significantly, and Yun Nak-young, the leader of the out-of-the-way rally, and the members of the Liberty Korea Party were stunned. The government requested the National Assembly to form a special committee to promote smooth inter-Korean economic cooperation. When Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon appeared to the National Assembly to explain the contents of the talks and inter-Korean economic cooperation, Representative Yun Nak-young strongly pushed. The world is putting sanctions on North Korea, and in this situation, do you think there is nothing wrong with South Korea's independent resumption of tourism to Mt. Jumgang? Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon calmly explained. According to the sanctions against North Korea, we cannot pay cash in return to North Korea. The North Korean side is well aware of the issue, and we plan to pay for the tourism in a way that is acceptable to the international community. What if the work proceeds without consultation with the United States? South Korea has a responsibility and an obligation to comply with international sanctions against North Korea. Yes. We are pushing ahead with the work within the scope that does not violate sanctions against North Korea. Seo Na-kyung-yeon continued to raise his voice. Don't blindfold like that and answer clearly. No, have you answered now? But she wasn't listening. Don't cry like that. People are watching. Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon, who was impatient, also raised his voice. Are you crying? What are you talking about? I'm answering all your questions, how the hell do you answer them more clearly? Then Soo-yeon Na-kyung raised her voice even more. Korea is a member of the international community and has an obligation to participate in international sanctions. Again, in a direction that does not go against sanctions against North Korea. This is something that could bring rifts to the US-ROK alliance. If America turns its back, who will ensure the safety of our people? The safety of our people is guaranteed by our military. Don't talk like that. Then, do you think our military will not be able to protect the people? You keep saying something different, but I am talking about the importance of the ROK-US alliance. How long are you going to do the humiliating diplomacy of being dragged into North Korea in this way? Aren't you ashamed of the people? As they were shouting with excitement, a murmur spread among the lawmakers. A lawmaker ran quickly and whispered in the ear of Seo-yeon Na-kyung. President Ronald just posted on Twitter, she said. Read more at wuxiax.com. Seo-yeon Na-kyung was surprised to see the phone he held out. Resuming tourism to MT Kumgong is a great decision. I applaud the efforts of the Korean government. I hope to play golf with my friend Chairman Kim at MT Kumgong in the near future. After seeing President Ronald's tweet, Seo-yeon Na-kyung was at a loss for words. Is there a golf course on MT Kumgong? As the opposition lawmakers murmured, Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon smiled inwardly and recalled Kang Jin-hoo's words. Didn't you say that the President of the United States would vote soon? But it's going to be this soon. Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon said with his waist up and his shoulders stretched out. What did you just say? Did you say that this would create a rift in the ROK-US alliance? President Ronald doesn't seem to think so, but on what basis does President Na-kyung-yeon make such a statement? No, this is... Confused, Seo-yeon Na-kyung quickly brought up another topic. It is said that South Korea is also forming a consortium and investing in the gas pipeline and rail connection projects between North Korea and Russia, but the first investment by South Korea alone is 3 trillion won. But hasn't the MT Kumgong tour stopped for 10 years? According to the data received from Yeonsang Kumgong, the accumulated loss has already exceeded KRW 1 trillion. If North Korea goes bankrupt again, what will you do with our businesses? In fact, the Liberal People's Party's argument was true. In the meantime, the progressive camp has made various attempts to lead North Korea toward reform and opening. However, in the end, North Korea pursued nuclear development, and all economic cooperation that had been previously carried out was halted. And the resulting damage was borne by the companies. There is nothing to be said for being criticized for only spreading taxes. Seeing Seo-yeon Na-kyung, who was sitting across from him shouting, Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon thought of a young man in his 20s. It is true that he has been displeased with him all this time. What kind of people would act that way at a dinner between the two Koreas with the president? But now I have completely changed my mind. Kang Jin-hoo was a troublemaker when he turned him into an enemy, but when he became an ally, he was more reliable than anyone else. Depending on how he uses it, he can be of great help to the government. Just like right now. Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon said proudly. I agree with what you said. No, don't just sympathize and tell me what to do. To rush things without clear measures is to drive our companies into limbo. Yes. As a sure measure, Russia has agreed to cover the entire project. If the project is halted or cancelled, Russia will buy back the shares purchased by Korea. Therefore, there will be no harm to our government or businesses. Yes. What did you say? Hu Yun Nakyung looked unbelievable. Economic cooperation with North Korea has great benefits, but also great risks. Where are one or two countries and companies that have been hit in the head after investing so far? But Russia assumes all the responsibility? Why? Oh no, I didn't hear that announcement. This is Parliament, Minister. Otherwise, it is not a place where we can move on. CEO Kang Jin, who has already finished talking with the Russian representative. Are you Kang Jin, who representative? Unification Minister Yoon Ji-hoon looked at Representative Yun Nakyung and asked. There is no concern for the ROK-US alliance, and there is no concern for our company to suffer losses. It seems that all the problems you mentioned have been resolved. Do you have any more questions? The North Korea-Russia summit was held in Vladivostok. The North Korean leader rode a railroad and stepped on Russian soil, and the two leaders held each other's hands. After 2 days of talks, the two leaders agreed to build a railroad and gas pipeline through North Korean territory in connection with the Rajan Hassan project. As planned, the investment in this will be carried out in a way that the Russian government and a company will form a consortium, and the Korean government and a consortium formed by a company will take over the stake. All responsibility for the business was to be borne by Russia. At the signing ceremony, Chairman Kim personally appeared in front of reporters and said, "Our republic has decided to independently carry out the gas pipeline and railway connection project that Russia and South Korea want. This will be of great help to the lives of the people, and it can be said to be a new step in inter-Korean relations." Up to this point, everyone knew. However, the following presentation was enough to shock everyone. In the past, Japan committed irreparable crimes on the Korean peninsula, and many people are still suffering as a result. The Republic of Korea is planning to initiate the claims agreement with Japan in accordance with the San Francisco Treaty, and we urge the Japanese side to actively engage in this negotiation. The announcement of the North Korean leader in Vladivostok shocked the world. All the elders reported this as breaking news, and NHK stopped regular broadcasting and organized emergency news and special programs. In the midst of the hustle and bustle, another news flew in. It is that Jin-Hu Kang, CEO of OTK Company, has decided to advise the North on the amount calculation and payment method. I thought that Kang Jin-Hu was playing a role in inter-Korean economic cooperation, but no one expected it to be a claims agreement. Reporters from inside and outside the country immediately packed up their cameras and microphones and rushed to the OTK Company headquarters. As Kang Jin-Hu appeared in front of the front door, the reporters all asked questions. Is the North's announcement true? Did you really advise on the negotiation of the claim to Japan? Has this been discussed with the Korean government in advance? When did you make that decision? Among domestic and foreign reporters was Hideo Kuroda, a reporter for the Sankei Shimbun. He asked, shouting in a slightly slurred Korean, "Why are you involved in negotiations between Japan and North Korea? OTK Company is not even participating in this project, so what qualification do you have as an advisor to North Korea?" Kang Jin-Hu looked at him and said, "Are you eligible? It's the same nation. Do you need any more reason?" At that, reporter Kuroda had an astonished expression on his face. "No, when is foreign capital?" he shouted again. "This is between Japan and North Korea. It is an act of exaltation for the representative to get involved here. My maternal grandfather was born in Hamjeongdo. According to a story I heard as a child, many people around my maternal grandfather were mobilized for the forced conscription of the Japanese imperialists and were taken to the battlefield, coal mines and comfort women. Can you still say that I have nothing to do with North Korea?" The Sankei Shimbun is Japan's representative conservative press, and Kang Jin-Hu is a Korean who has the greatest influence on Japan. Therefore, reporter Kuroda knew everything about Kang Jin-Hu's family. "Didn't your maternal grandfather die when you were young?" "Yes. He died when he was 5 years old. It is so shocking for a story I heard at a young age that I remember it even more clearly. If you'd like, I can tell you all day how much damage Japan did during its colonization of the Korean peninsula. Do you want to hear it? At that he shut his mouth. It is a place where foreign media from all over the world gather. It was of no benefit that Japan's past history was controversial. This time a CNN reporter asked a question. How much do you think the amount of claims against Japan is? Jin Ho-kong said as if his heart was aching. How can the damage suffered by the nation and its people as a result of Japanese aggression and forced colonial rule be converted into money? However, if a sincere apology is backed up, I think the compensation amount is around $100 billion considering the circumstances in Japan. At those words, all the reporters were at a loss for words. This is 3 times the GDP of North Korea, more than 10 times the amount of trade, and is equivalent to 5% of Japan's annual budget. Even if you add up all the compensation that Japan has paid to the victims, this amount will not come out. Kang Jin-hoo looked around the surprised reporters and said, I think everyone would be surprised by how small the compensation was compared to the damage. However, I think that North Korea and Japan need to make a big concession if they are to move forward into the future. Jin Ho-kong claims $100 billion in claims against Japan. Invoice submitted to Japan. What is the Japanese response? How to calculate the amount of claim against Japan? Exchange of opinions at the level of $10 billion in the past North Korea-Japan talks. Is $100 billion possible? Reference to Kang Jin-hoo's reparation. Was it intentional? Jin Ho-kang's remarks were enough to turn the Japanese archipelago upside down. Jin Ho-kang is not an expert on North Korea, so what are you advising? When did you say you're the twins of the world? Does it make sense to get advice from that bastard? Isn't this just a fix to get more money? Why does Japan have to pay compensation to the North Koreans? Someone please explain. All extensions were accomplished because Joseon wanted it. But now what kind of money are you asking for? Rather, Japan should take the money. Chickshow. How much more are you going to rip this time? Don't give me a single yen. No more. Really no. Let's go to war. War is the only answer. The self-defense forces are the strongest in the world. When Japanese netizens stood up, Korean netizens also did not stand still. Hey, this time I'm really relieved. Crazy ha. At least $100 billion. Jin Ho-kang looks really crazy. Oh. I want to kill Yun Kazaki after the earthquake. Okazaki. No matter what you do, you are bound to be beaten by Kang Jin-hoo. Hey, so you're not going to use the OTK battery? Aren't you going to do Lost Fantasy? Aren't you going to watch porn? War? It sucks if war breaks out, you too are subject to conscription. The self-defense forces are the strongest in the world. Ha. Is there a Gundam in the self-defense forces? When the war breaks out, Chief Cabinet Secretary Shinji Hayashi participates in the war aboard the first unit. Netizens on both sides argued over the issue, and it escalated into a cyber war in which hikikomori, keyboard warriors and fossils from both countries participated in large numbers. The biggest issue in Japan recently was the bankruptcy of Technics. An interesting fact is that the cause of Technics' bankruptcy is Jin Ho-kang. Until just 3 years ago, Technics had the world's second largest battery market share. Technics exclusively supplied circular batteries to Nikola and established Gigaplant with Nikola. Technics has a 40% stake in the world's largest Gigaplant plant built in Nevada. The batteries produced here were to be supplied not only to Nikola, but also to other electric vehicle manufacturers. A huge investment was made, but it was expected that the plant would be fully recovered once the plant was completed and started operation, and the stock price soared. However, OTK batteries were made before the plant was even completed. Lithium-ion batteries were first commercialized in the early 1990s. Since then, the capacity has more than doubled, but the material itself has not changed much. But finally, a new battery using a new material is out in the world. Kara's new car equipped with OTK battery quickly dominated the market, and Nikola's market share fell and Technics sales also declined. Giga plant, which was in partial operation with the explosion of Big One, was damaged and stopped, and Nikola went to work out. Keris took over Nikola at the request of American politicians, but there was no reason to take responsibility for the Japanese company Technics. The money invested in anticipation of an increase in market share in the future was counted as a loss. As the loss snowballed, Technics even considered selling the battery division, but no company was willing to buy a prototype battery factory that had already lost its competitiveness. Technics couldn't stand it any longer and filed for bankruptcy. The home appliance and solar power sectors were torn apart and sold to China and India, and tens of thousands of people lost their jobs in Japan alone. After Sharp and Toshiba, Technics, which once had a market cap of 4 trillion yen and the second largest in the electronics industry, went bankrupt and Japan was engulfed in shock. This was nothing but a clear indication of how influential the OTK battery was. Technology once advanced can never go back. Thanks to OTK batteries, OTK company has taken the lead in the electronics industry as well as the automobile industry. Except for home appliances such as TVs and refrigerators, there are no electronic products that do not contain batteries. Electronic companies around the world are in fierce competition to secure even a little more OTK battery supply. In fact, even during the Korea-Japan trade dispute, it was the interruption of OTK battery supply that Japan suffered the most. At that time, the Japanese government shouted to the international community that it was unfair retaliation, but that statement did not work when they first started trade retaliation. In the end, as we all know, the Japanese government first raised the white flag, overturned its existing position and paid compensation for the judgment of forced labor. The Auto Alliance, which was ambitiously promoted by Prime Minister Okazaki, was also practically broken. Toyota, whose largest shareholder was reversed due to an order mistake at Nishida Securities, was engulfed in internal strife, and Japanese automakers who looked out for each other all reached out to Keris and requested the supply of OTK batteries. However, with the exception of Carlos, GM, Ford and Hyundai take the top priority, followed by European companies such as BMW, Peugeot and Fiat. Among Japanese companies, the voices of Volmen that they believed in the government and followed it and then practiced it broke out. This hit was reflected in economic indicators. Thanks to quantitative easing, which provided an unlimited supply of yen to the market, both growth and inflation, which had barely risen, fell back to negative. The third quarter growth rate announced last month was shocking. Credit rating agencies such as S&P and Moody's have diagnosed the Japanese economy as entering a recession again. It was difficult to estimate how much damage Japan suffered from one person after the earthquake. Some experts estimate that the damage caused by a mistake in the order of Nishida Securities, the collapse of the Japanese stock market, the damage to the electronics and automobile industries due to the trade dispute, and the economic downturn combined, caused at least 20 trillion yen to 50 trillion yen in damages. Who would have imagined that Japan, the world's third largest economy, would suffer so much damage to just one Korean? At the very least, even among the right-wingers, there were mixed self-help words about the defeat of the Japanese Empire to Kong Jin-hu. This was a fatal blow for Prime Minister Okazaki and the LDP, who had been calling for a strong Japan. After suffering defeat in the Nishida Securities crisis and the trade dispute, the slogan of a strong Japan is now nonsense. Some of the right wings still shouted that we should recover the amount lost even in the war with Korea, but it was just an empty cry. Among the LDP lawmakers, talk about reclaiming Toyota stock or suing the OTK company was heard. Even the ministers of the cabinet, who had never hesitated to talk about forced labor and the comfort women issue, kept their mouths shut. As he had already suffered several times, he was thinking of avoiding friction with Korea and Gangjin. However, this did not mean that he gave up the right-wing path. Prime Minister Okazaki rallied his supporters in Japan and hastened the movement for constitutional reform. It has been his long-cherished dream to make Japan a normal nation capable of war by abolishing the peace constitution that prohibits holding an army and engaging in war. The North Korean threat helped boost the approval rate for constitutional amendment, so Japan did not want inter-Korean relations to improve. Prime Minister Okazaki could not hide his joy when North Korea launched various provocations such as missile launches after the breakdown of the North Korea-US summit, and requested the South Korean government to even demolish the MT Kumgang facility. But the happiness did not last long. After Kang Jin-ho attended the meeting, he resumed tourism to MT Jumgang and completed gas pipeline and railroad projects. I am already watching with an uncomfortable feeling that the tense inter-Korean relations are moving into a mood of reconciliation. What is this? Suddenly a bullet flew towards Japan. An emergency cabinet meeting was held. Prime Minister Okazaki exclaimed, "Why is the claim to Japan suddenly coming up, and why did Jin-ho Kang intervene?" Foreign Minister Okamoto said in a sweat. It seems that the right to claim against Japan is being mentioned as a safeguard for inter-Korean economic cooperation. It seems that they are planning to carry out the claims agreement while the gas pipeline and railroad projects are in progress. There is a risk of making public discussions about the issue of past history in the international community by referring to North Korea's compensation issue. Isn't this the intention of re-establishing Japan-Korea relations? His anger was so intense that his whole body trembled and blood in his eyes stood up. Prime Minister Okazaki sharpened this. After Gangjin, you bastard. Dare to use Japan for inter-Korean relations? How the hell do you look down on Japan? The work was done before the ink on the agreement had dried. South Korea has decided to form a consortium and, together with Russia, send a delegation to North Korea to check the condition of the railroad. In a situation where it is difficult to eat and live, the infrastructure cannot be maintained properly. Currently, North Korean railways are so old that even trains, let alone high-speed trains, cannot keep up with their speed. Therefore, the direction of tearing down the entire section and reconstructing it was discussed. One good thing is that civil engineering works have already been carried out as long as there was a railway. The most difficult part of railway construction is purchasing a site, compacting the ground and digging a tunnel. In comparison, it was relatively easy to tear down and rebuild an old railroad. Another advantage here is the enormous labor force of North Korea. Although North Korea lacks technology and capital, it is overflowing with people. If necessary, the People's Army will also be sent to the construction site to engage in speed warfare. Russia announced a plan to link this project with the revitalization of the Far East and resource development in Siberia and Central Asian countries, which will benefit from the railway connection in the future, also showed great interest. Another protest was held in front of the OTK company headquarters. Conservative groups such as Dr. Mo and others put up signs such as "Retreat the Reds," "Exterminate the pro-North Korean left," and "Send Jin-ho Kang to North Korea." Jin-ho Kang is helping North Korea. North Korea is the main enemy of the Republic of Korea, and it is a hostile force trying to unify a free Republic of Korea. Joining hands with North Korea is clearly an act of transfer. Kang Jin-ho must be punished immediately by the National Security Act. Punish. Punish. It's not surprising as it wasn't the first or two similar protests. Taekyu turned his head to the side. But what are they? On the opposite side of the conservative group, a small group of college students were gathering and protesting. Our Baek Dupre's alliance welcomes Chairman Kim's decision. Now, the Korean peninsula must prevent the emergence of divided enemy forces and achieve unification led by our people. In order to accomplish the task of independent reunification, the U.S. forces from Korea must be withdrawn immediately from this land. Withdraw. Withdraw. Even in a country with freedom of expression, what are you doing? Why is the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Korea here? Taekyu looked at me and asked, "Which opinion do you like?" I hate both. Articles about the Vladivostok Agreement poured in from all over the world. The focus of the article was on the right to claim against Japan rather than the South-North Russia Cooperation Project. Some media even called it the Gang Jinhu's Bill. However, in order to understand why North Korea is claiming compensation from Japan, it is necessary to understand the colonial rule of the Korean Peninsula and the Pacific War. This inevitably had to be directly related to the issue of Japan's past history. The New York Times, Washington Post, Le Monde, Financial Times, People's Daily, Global Times, etc. published detailed explanations of the claim against Japan as major news. While most Westerners were well aware of the war crimes committed by Germany, they were insensitive to the war crimes of Japan, because they were not directly harmed. However, Kang Jin-ho's remarks about the right to claim against Japan became an issue, and interest in it exploded. Did Japan really do such a thing? You dragged a young girl into sexual slavery, gang raped it, and tested it on humans? Nonsense. All the Japanese people around me are nice and kind. That rising sun flag is like a Nazi. So did Korea and China react so much? What do you think of using that kind of thing to cheer for the game? Is that flag allowed to be brought into the Olympic Stadium? So shouldn't Nazis be allowed too? It's terrible. It's hard to believe it was done by the same person. Japanese friends are absolutely not. They say it's all made up by Korea and China. But what is the truth? Even my Japanese friends say they have never seen it in textbooks. Rather, it is said that he learned that he helped a lot, such as erecting buildings and laying railroads in Korea. Japan has been trying to erase its past for a long time. But Japan's war crimes are clear. You didn't just bomb Pearl Harbor, you committed such terrible crimes. If it wasn't for Kang Jin-ho, I would have never known about it. Just as Jin-ho Kang helped the United States, I also want to help the grandmothers who were taken as sex slaves by the Japanese military. What would be a good way? Searches for Claims Agreement, Pacific War, Japanese military sexual slavery, forced labor, and war crimes in Japan surged on portal sites in each country. What Japan feared is becoming a reality. Japan has been busy taking measures. First, they lobbied against media outlets around the world and requested that the article be taken down, while distributing press releases refuting Kang Jin-ho's remarks. $100 billion, about 10 trillion yen. This is an unbelievable amount for Japan, which is already suffering from an astronomical fiscal deficit. There was another problem. Let's say North Korea makes reparations whatever it wants. So what then? Will the previously repared country stand still? Through the claims agreement, Japan settled its historical issues with Asian countries. However, only Korea has consistently mentioned the issue of past history, and recently demanded compensation from the Japanese side for the comfort women and victims of forced labor. So why do other countries stand still? Even after losing the war, Japan is still a great power. Therefore, no country wanted to turn Japan into an enemy. The economic power of other affected countries is not comparable to that of Japan, and it is highly dependent on Japanese capital. On the other hand, Korea has grown rapidly and has entered the ranks of advanced countries, and thus has begun to raise its voice. In the case of South Korea, it is possible to take the position that everything was resolved through the Korea-Japan Basic Treaty, but if the opponent was North Korea, that could not be the case. In front of the press, Chief Cabinet Secretary Hayashi spoke in a tone of displeasure. There is no official request from North Korea for the claims agreement. If there is an official request, we will officially start the discussion. However, this issue is a matter for both Japan and North Korea, and not for any other country to be involved in. This is a very serious diplomatic disrespect, and I will strongly protest to the Republic of Korea. After visiting South Korea, Foreign Minister Okamoto met Foreign Minister Kim Song-cheol and formally protested. Isn't this too much to do? Why is South Korea interfering in negotiations between Japan and North Korea? Foreign Minister Kim Song-cheol shook his head. I do not understand what you are saying. The South Korean government has nothing to do with this. The claims agreement is up to North Korea and Japan to do. The Korean government will not play any role in the future unless both countries agree. Are you saying that even after looking at the media reports now? Foreign Minister Kim Song-cheol sighed. We were also surprised to see the article. I never imagined that Seo Kong-jin who would act as an advisor to the North Korean side. Did the Korean government not know? We are in a very difficult position. It was only Kong Jin-ho's personal actions, and the government was completely unaware of it. CEO Kong Jin-ho participated in the inter-Korean talks and carried out the railway and gas pipeline projects, and at the same time, CEO Kong Jin-ho advised on the claim against Japan. Is this a coincidence? Of course. It is a completely separate matter. It was amazing. Who do you think is a fool? The media all over the world are reporting that these two are being carried out together. And yet it has nothing to do with it. Foreign Minister Okamoto was able to read the insides of his opponent. Are you saying that the Korean government will take care of the profits and pass the responsibility on to Kong Jin-ho? The reason for this is because Japan knows that it is difficult to use their hands against Kong Jin-ho. Even in Japan there is a growing backlash against Korea. Do you know what kind of adverse effect these actions will have on Japan-Korea relations in the future? Japan is an important neighbor and economic partner of Korea, and I agree with the idea that friendly relations between Korea and Japan should continue. Are you saying that you are leaving Seo Kong Jin-ho as it is? We tried to persuade him several times but to no avail. You have to listen. Foreign Minister Okamoto suppressed what he wanted to shout. If CEO Kong Jin-ho is helping North Korea without the permission of the South Korean government, shouldn't it be punished by the National Security Act? Conservative groups are also claiming this. But the National Security Act is like a rubber band, so if you put it on your nose it's a nose ring, and if you put it on your ear it's an earring. It seems that there has been a discussion between the US and the Russian side. It's not a substitute for negotiation, it's just advice. Can't we be punished for something like this? And it is up to the Korean judiciary to decide whether to punish its citizens or not. Please refrain from making comments that interfere with internal affairs. Seeing Foreign Minister Okamoto's contorted eyes, Minister of Foreign Affairs Kim Song-cheol smiled inwardly. When can Korea put the Japanese foreign minister in such a corner? Diplomatic power eventually follows national power. The more economic and military power is backed up, the louder the diplomat's voice will be. On the other hand, diplomats from weak countries must be careful with every word and every action. A typical example of this is the struggle for prestige between Austria and Prussia for dominance in Germany. At that time, there was a custom that only the Austrian delegates smoked in public at the Federal Assembly, but Bismarck broke the custom and lit a cigarette. This was a symbolic act that showed that Prussia's power had grown enough to face Austria. The representatives, startled by this, urgently reported this fact to their home country. Diplomacy determines whether or not you can even smoke a single cigarette depending on your national strength. Korea is a powerful country both economically and militarily, but there are too many great powers around. In addition, the proportion of exports is large, and it relies on the United States militarily and economically on China. Therefore, in diplomacy it was always necessary to keep an eye on neighboring countries. However, after Kong Jin-ho appeared, the situation changed. The ROK-US alliance is stronger than ever, and the relationship with Russia is unparalleled. While the Japanese economy faltered, OTK companies still performed well. And the Korean economy, backed by Kong Jin-ho, is also growing smoothly. If we add the strong Jin-ho to Korea's economic power, it is also worthy of a match with Japan. Even at this moment, OTK companies' influence in the overall industry is gradually growing. If OTK company cuts off business with Japanese companies, which one will suffer more? Because Japan also knew about it, he must have come to see him instead of Jin-ho Kong. I'm sure there will be a person like this among my juniors in the Business Administration Department of Korea University. Foreign Minister Kim Song-cheol said with a sad expression on his face. Why don't you visit the American side and see? Why didn't you think of that? The fact that the United States has been quiet so far is like taking sides after the earthquake. Rather, it is fortunate that Japan and other countries do not push Japan to pay compensation quickly. Or how about visiting CEO Kang Jin-hu in person? You should be at work right now. Read more at wuxiax.com. Foreign Minister Okamoto recalled being bullied by Kang Jin-hu the other day. It was considered one of the most humiliating incidents that a Japanese foreign minister has ever suffered. Who is this kid kidding now? A business meeting on inter-Korean economic cooperation was held at the Blue House. Dozens of CEOs of large and small businesses gathered in one place. CEOs of large corporations expressed great interest in the economic effects of gas pipeline and railroad projects, and CEOs of small and medium-sized enterprises showed great interest in restarting and expanding the Kaesong industrial complex. President Han Byung-sun held my hand and expressed his gratitude. I never imagined that things would turn out so well. It's all thanks to you. What? Thanks to everyone's hard work. Chairman Chon Young-han also came to this place. How have you been? Chairman Chon Young-han said with a bitter smile. Thanks for keeping me busy. There seemed to be bones in his words, but there was no sign of resentment or anger. Even after the Unsung Tea Group, which was the center of the group, was taken away by Karis, the Unsung Tea Group still showed off its strength in the top 10 in the business world. It owns Unsung MD Electronics and Auto Parts affiliates, as well as Unsung Steel and Unsung Construction, which was the parent company of Unsung Group in the past. As before, it is supplying parts to Unsung Motors, and Unsung Steel and Construction are participating in the development of Simangium. Unsung Motor Group will also benefit greatly from this inter-Korean economic cooperation. Unsung E&C has experience participating in North Korea projects several times, including building a hotel and banquet hall on MT Jumgang. For this reason, it was considered as a beneficiary of this inter-Korean economic cooperation. Another company worth noting is Unsung RT. RT is a rail and train, and as the name suggests, it is a company that makes railroad cars. It can produce locomotives and electric trains as well as a few high-speed trains in the world. As the Inter-Korean Railway Connection project started, Russia began to modernize the Trans-Siberian Railway, and other Eurasian countries also showed great interest in railway modernization and construction. This will be a new opportunity for the Korean railway industry. While we were talking with the businessmen around us for a while, President Ha Chong-min appeared. He greeted the businessmen one by one and shook hands. Then when it was my turn, President Ha Chong-min grabbed my hand and spoke in a slightly trembling voice. You worked hard, Seo Kang Jin-hu. It seems that they are suddenly pretending to be friendly. The business meeting was held in a friendly atmosphere. Everyone's eyes lit up with lively expressions. This inter-Korean economic cooperation will bring tremendous opportunities to Korean companies. Even if it wasn't the president's words, a businessman would have sensed an opportunity to earn money. Until now, access to North Korea was not easy because it was tied to various sanctions and the risk was too great. But this time a different thought prevailed. The economy is like a living organism, and once it starts, it runs on its own. During the nuclear test, the Kaesong industrial complex continued to operate without stopping. It was Korea that actually stopped it. Ukraine is also at war with Russia, but has not even touched a Russian gas pipeline that runs through its territory. When the gas pipeline and railroad are completed, they will continue to be used separately from relations with North Korea in the future. Also, if Japan receives reparations, the money will be used mainly to build infrastructure for economic development under the supervision of the international community. The country that will benefit the most from this is Korea. As for the economic effect of inter-Korean economic cooperation, experts have slightly different opinions. It is true that North Korea is a land of opportunity, but there is no need to fantasize too much. Some experts point to North Korea's cheap labor force as a strength, but in fact, it is already abundant in Southeast Asia and Africa. This is not the 1960s, and most of the labor-intensive industries are being replaced by machines. Rather, more important than wages are social infrastructure and the level of education of workers. If you look at the Kaesong industrial complex, you might think that the level of North Korean workers is quite high, but those workers are highly educated even in North Korea. Not to mention loyalty to the party and the leader. However, if there is no merit to set up a factory in North Korea, it is not. From the perspective of Korean companies, there is a big advantage that the distance is close and the language is communicative. As long as logistics is connected, the outdated infrastructure can be overcome to some extent by utilizing Korea's infrastructure. In fact, the Kaesong industrial complex operated in that way. After the meeting that served as a luncheon, President Ha Chong-min walked around the Blue House grounds with businessmen and talked. Reporters followed and took pictures of us with cameras. It's going to be the headlines this evening. Among the invited businessmen were RCK Brothers Chairman Ryu Cheoljun and Vice Chairman Shin Byung-do. Chairman Ryu Cheoljun smiled and said to me, "You did a great job again." "What?" "It's just that what we've been working on before has come true." "Has no one ever been able to do that?" "This event will completely change the situation in Northeast Asia. RCK Brothers is also looking for investments in Central Asia and Eastern Europe." Vice Chairman Shin Byung-do continued. "Once the railroad is connected, the movement of logistics will be free, which will have the effect of tying the economy into a single block. The Russian economy is growing rapidly despite the current Western sanctions. In addition, Siberian resource development and Central Asian development projects will be accelerated. It also has the effect of checking China's Belt and Road Initiative. So the U.S. agrees. There are still many concerns and objections, but if progress is made well, the effect beyond the money invested can be achieved for sure. I heard that the deputy representative also did a great job in this case." I nodded. "Taekyu worked hard too. Even now he is actively engaged in a keyboard battle with net right-wingers on the internet. He's also brave enough to say he's a bitch on the internet." With that in mind, President Ha Chong-min approached me. Chairman Ryu Cheoljun and Vice Chairman Shin Byung-do naturally slowed down and stepped back. President Ha Chong-min told me, "I realized once again that one great person can change the world." I answered humbly, "Thanks to everyone's hard work. But if it wasn't for you, nobody would have done it. Whether you are a politician or a businessman, if you have a lot of things and have a lot of responsibility, you have no choice but to pay attention to the people around you. The only person who is free from this problem is me. Although it is the third largest economy in the world, the Japanese economy is currently facing various difficulties. Astronomical national debt, year-over-year fiscal deficit, aging population, declining population, chronic deflation, etc. As a way out, they were focusing on export expansion through the low yen, but both exports and domestic demand were declining after being hit in the last trade dispute between Korea and Japan. Economic cooperation between the two Koreas and Russia under such circumstances was another bad news for the Japanese economy. Korea and Japan are global manufacturing powerhouses. In addition, although both countries are nuclear power plants, the share of thermal power generation is high and all energy is imported from abroad. What if Korea imports natural gas at less than half that of Japan? Electricity costs are directly related to producer prices. If gas is brought in cheaply, the production cost of Korean products will fall and price competitiveness will arise. This is a huge blow to the Japanese industry where export items overlap. The North-South railway connection was also not very good for Japan. There are only two modes of export transportation in Korea and Japan. Either by air or by ship. Air transport is fast but expensive. Shipping is slow but cheap. Rail transport is in the middle both in time and cost. However, if the export destination is a landlocked country, the story is different. In areas such as Siberia, northern China, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe, rail transport is much more efficient. If not only goods but also capital and manpower flow freely through the railroad, and Korea forms an economic bloc with Russia and Central Asia, Japan will fall behind that much. The Japanese Economic Research Institute was concerned about the loss of economic hegemony by Japan in Asia while analyzing the economic effects that Korea would have. Politically and economically, concerns about Japan passing have grown, and the business community has urged measures to be taken. Let's build an undersea tunnel to connect gas pipelines and railroads to the Japanese archipelago, send containers to Busan port and load them on the railroad from there, and go on a relationship with Korea. No matter what you do, you have to say sorry to Korea. Politicians have been busy finding solutions. There were differences of opinion within the LDP. I don't know why they keep bringing up things that are more than 50 years old. How long will you be stuck in the past? Japan has already taken responsibility enough. It is unreasonable to pay any more compensation. No matter how much the war was lost, what country has paid such reparations to neighboring countries? We must inform the international community of injustice. While there were strong opinions, prudence was not formidable. We need to hold a Japan-Korea summit as soon as possible. The Prime Minister should visit Korea and work closely with South Korea on this issue. Rather than that, it is urgent to normalize relations between Japan and North Korea. We need to actively review the claims agreement. If this continues, Japan could be isolated from Asia. In this situation, Representative Itsuki Fujiwara, a senior LDP leader and right-hand man of Prime Minister Okazaki, spoke in a Balmain voice at a drinking party. What did the alternative government do to get to this point? Shouldn't it have been easier to prevent South Korea, North Korea and Russia from cooperating? Improving relations with neighboring countries is of no benefit to Japan. Only when special events such as the Korean War occur one more time can Japan escape from the recession. This remark was reported by the Asahi Shimbun reporter who was present at the time. Representative Fujiwara, who at first denied saying, "I never said anything like that," changed his words when the recording was released saying, "I'm drunk and I can't remember." He seemed displeased with reporters' questions about the truth of his remarks. I can only see that there was an impure intention in making articles like jokes at a drinking party. Do journalists have no patriotism? Right-wing media such as the Sankei Shimbun underreported the incident or did not report it at all. In fact, this is not the first time politicians and bureaucrats have made such rude comments. Previously, it was a good way to gather support groups. However, in a situation where the eyes of the world are already focused on Japan's past, this remark has spread all over the place. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement. Does Japan speak of peace in its words, but inwardly wish for conflict? Have you not been able to shake off the specter of militarism that has stained Asia with blood? A spokesman for the South Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs said in a calm but hard tone. The Korean War was a terrible war that killed about 2.5 million people, including soldiers and civilians on the Korean peninsula, as well as soldiers from 20 countries. I just want to ask if we want this global tragedy to happen once again for the sake of Japan's economic interests. Not only the North and South Korea and Russia included in the remarks, but also critics from China and the United States abounded. U.S. veterans who fought in the Korean War issued a protest statement and demanded an explanation from the Japanese government. These two countries, excluding the South and the North, are the countries with the highest number of soldiers and the highest number of deaths. As the situation escalated out of control, Senator Fujiwara eventually resigned, and Prime Minister Okazaki finally bowed his head. I would like to state clearly that the remarks made by the member have nothing to do with the position of the Japanese government and the party. As the leader of the LDP, I express my deepest regret for this incident. Japan promises to do its best for the peace and prosperity of Asia as it has been and will continue to do its best in the future. However, international criticism showed no sign of subside. Countries affected by the Pacific War such as Vietnam, the Philippines and Indonesia also showed a cold gaze. But the most outrageous was North Korea. The Pink Lady, who appeared on Chosun Central TV, shouted with her characteristic exasperated voice. The whole world has once again witnessed the nature of the wicked bastards who, instead of reflecting on their past cruel and horrific crimes, say they have a hole in their mouth. A malignant tumor that destroys peace in Northeast Asia. If Japan strikes again, it has no choice but to punish those 4 insignificant islands with the Juche nuclear bomb. Seeing the reaction of North Korea, Taekyu could not help but admire. It was a penetrating voice that touched the hearts of the people. I think I'm impressed now. After all, not everyone is a people's hero. In fact, you can easily find such a swear word just by looking on the internet. However, North Korea is the only country in the world that makes such a statement on public broadcasters so casually. It really is an amazing country. The reason North Korea is so strong is because it can be used to strengthen the system. As always, the enemy on the outside will help to unite the inside. What should be noted is the Japanese response. This incident was nothing short of showing how easy it is for Japanese politicians to take the current situation. As I've looked in the wrong direction from the right-wing trend until now, noise is also coming out from inside. It also means that Prime Minister Okazaki is not properly cracking down on the inside. Taekyu said with his arms crossed. They're still out of their minds. The Japanese backlash was easily anticipated. Negotiations start now. Depending on who takes the initiative, the outcome will be different. To do this, it is necessary to support public opinion in the international community. If you can't come to your senses, you have to get them to come to your senses. I decided to go with Ellie to the house of sharing where her comfort women are gathered. I've donated a large amount of money before, but this is the first time I've personally visited it like this. It was announced a few days ago by OTK Company, and since it is a global concern, many domestic and foreign reporters have already gathered in front of the house of sharing. As soon as I got out of the car, questions from reporters poured in. A reporter from the Sankei Shimbun who seemed to have seen it before shouted, "I wonder what your intentions were to come here at a very politically sensitive time." At a very politically sensitive time, Japanese prime ministers and politicians pay homage to the Yasukuni Shrine, where Class A war criminals are enshrined. Do you mean that it is okay to worship war criminals and not to find victims? He asked a question in Korean, but I deliberately answered in English. That way it will be easier for the global media to broadcast it as it is. The Sankei Shimbun reporter asked again in a sharp voice. Isn't it like a show to show the press and volunteer work? I shook my head. It's not like that. Some of the comfort women victims of the Japanese military were taken by the Japanese in Hwanghae-do and Hamgyong-do. Wouldn't it be helpful to calculate the amount of compensation that North Korea will claim to Japan by hearing about what they experienced? The comfort women, who are now elderly, greeted Jin-Hoo Kong, Ellie, and reporters with their finely dressed up. Oops. Is Seo Kong Jin-Hoo here? I didn't have anything to laugh about these days, but I still laugh because of our soup. Last time I saw you kicking Okamoto out, I heard that you felt refreshed. Now and then I was just waiting for the day I would die, but now I feel like there is some hope. Jin-Hoo Kong greeted her grandmothers and her one by one. Just call me Jin-Hoo comfortably. It's a representative of the company, not here. Several volunteers had already come to the house of sharing, and some of them were Japanese. Jin-Hoo Kong and Eli looked around the house of sharing while cleaning with the volunteers in the morning. After lunch, the real testimony began. The grandmothers recalled the horrors of those days and said, I wasn't the only one dragged from Hamgyong province. 6 people, including myself, were taken from our village, including a 12-year-old boy. When we arrived, a Japanese military officer said, Are you going to devote your body and soul to the great Japanese empire from now on and become a sex slave? It seemed that time had taken everything away, and it was a calm voice that no longer felt anger or sadness. However, only the content was not. Ellie covered her mouth and burst into tears. and after the earthquake she tried to look as calm as possible, but she couldn't stop her eyes from blushing and trembling around her eyes. Her foreign reporters who were present were also shocked. Before coming here as she had been a night, she had thoroughly researched what the comfort women had been through. Even so, the stories I heard in person were even more terrifying and cruel. It was hard to believe that humans had done it to humans. When one of her grandmothers told her that the Japanese had stabbed her in the thigh because she did not spread her legs, and showed her scars on her thigh as she pulled up her skirt, a BBC reporter screamed and fainted. After the half-day testimony was over, Jin Hu Kong held her grandmother's hands and said, "I heard you today. If you hear this today, I think that Japan will also actively seek reparation for apologies. So you must stay alive until then." Kong Jin-Hu's meeting with her comfort women was still an international issue. Time magazine featured interviews with comfort women and survivors of forced labor, and other foreign media also focused on it. During colonial rule and war of aggression, Japan committed numerous crimes. But among them, the comfort women were nothing more than an Achilles heel. It is a crime against humanity that targets women, and the victims are still alive and photos and documents exist. As the testimony and evidence were so clear, Japan also could not deny the existence of the comfort women itself, but took the position that there was no state intervention or forced mobilization. Whenever this issue became an international issue, Japan blocked it by lobbying in all directions based on its enormous economic power. A typical example is that when private organizations from 8 countries, including South Korea and China, applied for registration of comfort women records with UNESCO, they even withheld payment of the contribution. The idea was to bury this fact at least as long as the survivors were alive. Once all survivors are dead, the demand for apologies and reparations will also weaken. Aren't the dead speechless? However, as Jin Hu Kong stepped in, the situation seemed to grow out of control. Unlike foreign media that reported headlines and major news, the Japanese media did not comment much. However, no matter how much it was hidden, there was no way that the articles that had become an international issue could not be known in Japan. The Japanese were shocked when they read the article. "Did you say that your country has committed such a crime?" As a Japanese, I sincerely apologize. No matter how much I apologize, their pain will not be healed, but I do apologize nonetheless. This is a fact that most Japanese were unaware of. Thanks for letting me know now. We will not forget this fact and will inform the people around us. It's too embarrassing and terrifying. Can Japan still be called a developed country? The opposition from the right was not uncommon. It's all lies. Fake fact. Don't be fooled by the lies of the Joshinsings. It wasn't that I was forced to bring it. I came here on my own feet and sold my body to make money. The income of the comfort women was several dozen times that of the soldiers. It's been decades and it's already over. The people who committed the crime are all dead, so why are you asking us to apologize? It's all over with the comfort women agreement. That's why you gave me money. I gave you money, what more can I say? Among other powers, which country has paid as much compensation as Japan? When a member of the Democratic Party of Japan asked a question about the matter in the Japanese National Assembly, Prime Minister Okazaki said, "The issue has already been resolved with the Comfort Women Agreement. Korea must keep its promises between countries. It is unfair to ask for any further apologies." This is what he said whenever the comfort women issue came up. Even if the Prime Minister is right, it was an agreement between Japan and South Korea, not North Korea, right? Japan should agree on all issues, including North Korea and the comfort women from the beginning. What is the government's response to this? While the Japanese political circle was bustling, the Korean political circle was also noisy. The liberal Kuomintang took a negative stance on inter-Korean economic cooperation and focused on attracting public opinion. However, as the comfort women issue emerged as an issue in the claims agreement between North Korea and Japan, sparks suddenly erupted. Criticism has once again surged against the South Korea-Japan Comfort Women Agreement that was overruled by the previous administration. Ko Yun Nakyung said as if it was unfair. It is not desirable for Korea-Japan relations to deteriorate further. For now, we need to move toward the future rather than judging the past. The activist diplomacy led by those who were obsessed with pro-North Korea is leading our diplomacy to anti-Japanese. In the end, the damage will come back to our people. It is time for politicians to think calmly whether they are using anti-Japanese sentiment politically. The remarks were strongly opposed in Korea, but Japan's right wing and haters praised it. International public opinion was clearly turning against Japan. The Japanese politicians were busy preparing countermeasures, but it was difficult to find an appropriate countermeasure. The reason Korea has not been able to respond strongly to Japan in the past or the Dokdo issue is that if the dispute between Korea and Japan grows, Korea will suffer more losses than Japan. However, after Kang Jin-woo appeared, the situation changed significantly. A member of the Japan Innovation Association ordered the government to take tough measures. We need to impose strong export sanctions on Korea for all items. It was unrealistic. If Japan again threatens the export of materials and parts, OTK company will respond in the same way. Even if you were prepared for damage and put it into action, it could not be as effective as before. In the first place, Japanese companies were able to grab hold of Korean companies in the fields of materials and parts because there was a belief that Korea and Japan were economic partners regardless of the political situation. However, Japan has shown that it can use its economy as a weapon according to the political situation. As there is no law prohibiting the same thing from happening again in the future, Korean companies have diversified their import sources to Europe and the United States for materials and parts that had been dependent on Japan under the leadership of OTK Company, while at the same time supporting small and medium-sized enterprises by cooperating with large companies. Started to foster domestic materials and parts companies. In fact, despite the lifting of export restrictions on South Korea, exports showed no sign of recovery. Exports to Korea in the last quarter decreased by more than 30% compared to the same period last year. For Japanese companies, it was absurd. Because the government was greedy not to sell, he lost a big-time customer who had been buying well. The problem did not end here. Other countries also rely on Japanese-made materials and parts. Watching the trade dispute between Korea and Japan, these countries also realized how dangerous their dependence on Japan is. Many countries have reduced their trade with Japan, instead increasing their trade with South Korea. In fact, such a result was almost as expected from the time the export sanctions were imposed. Even if Korea had surrendered and Japan had won, it would have been the same. You didn't get anything to gain, you just took your own instep. If they do the same thing again, there is a risk that the Japanese economy will collapse completely. We need to ask the United States to mediate. We must actively inform that the deterioration of Japan-Korea relations also poses a threat to the security of the United States. America's most important Asian ally is also Japan, not South Korea. So the US has secretly sided with Japan in the dispute between Korea and Japan. The Comfort Women Agreement reached under the previous administration was also largely due to the influence of the United States. However, South Korea has now been elevated to an ally of the United States, not behind Japan, and the United States has no longer sided with Japan. In fact, even now they are lobbying the Washington government by sprinkling huge amounts of money, but neither Democrats nor Republicans budge. Prime Minister Okazaki requested a visit to North Korea and a Japan-North Korea summit to find a breakthrough. However, North Korea lightly ignored the request and issued a statement of condemnation through Chosun Central TV. The arrogant Okazaki gang is spreading all sorts of nonsense in an attempt to cover up the crime of sexual slavery, which is an extraordinarily large crime against humanity. Before discussing negotiations, Japanese politicians should get down on their knees before our victims and their families and ask for forgiveness. It should be borne in mind that our people are trembling with astonishment and anger over the atrocities of the scoundrels. I entered the Golden Gate building with Take-You. The passing staff looked at me with a mixture of respect and surprise. When I went up to the branch manager's office, Hyunju's sister and Ellie were there. Whatever happened, Ellie was crying with her head bowed. I was surprised. "Why are you crying?" Taekyu asked. "Did your sister hit you?" Hyunju's older sister screamed. "I didn't hit you." Turns out she said that she was once again overcome with emotions while talking about the comfort women. She came back that day after all and cried profusely all day. I hugged Ellie and comforted her. Hyunju Nuna asked me, "What are you thinking?" "This time I am trying to get an apology and compensation from Japan. As you may know, international order and business are driven strictly by the logic of force, not emotion. There is no point in shouting that the weak are unfair." I nodded her head. Even an apology requires strength to receive it. Unlike Japan, Germany thoroughly punished war criminals and apologized to neighboring countries in terms of past history. Is this because Germans are good and Japanese are bad? Germany is located in the heart of Europe and has invaded great powers such as France, Britain, and the Soviet Union. Therefore, it was difficult to survive without cooperation with neighboring countries after the war. Read more at wuxiax.com. On the other hand, Japan invaded small countries such as island countries, Korea, China, Thailand, Vietnam, Myanmar, and Indonesia. Even after liberation, they were so backward that they desperately wanted Japanese funds to invest. Japan is still the most powerful country in Asia, and the victims were in a position to spread their hands on Japan's capital and technology. Therefore, there was no time to bring up the issue of past history. On the other hand, in Korea, it is enough to make a living, so now I am looking for rights. Taekyu asked. What about China? They have abandoned the claims agreement. In fact, it is no different than Japan that created the present Chinese Communist Party. At that time, the Communist Party, which was on the verge of destruction by the Kuomintang, waged a national government collaboration for the anti-Japanese struggle, and the Communist Party, which was overthrew the Kuomintang and established the People's Republic of China. Would Mao Zedong even say thank you for the invasion of Japan? Since then, China has renounced its claim to Japan, instead of being recognized as the only successor to the Qing dynasty. Therefore, it is difficult to directly discuss this issue. Ellie wiped away her tears and sighed. Germany alone made countless apologies to Jews, but didn't even mention the Gypsy massacre, she said. Britain also apologized to China for the Opium War, while not talking about other crimes. This is the harsh international reality. Japan's denial of the forced mobilization of comfort women, its hate speech, and even calling Dokdo Takashima and claiming that it is Japanese territory are all because they think it is in the interest of Japan. So, there is only one thing I have to think about right now. What can be the most profitable thing to do? Japan uses hatred of Korea in politics, but there is no law prohibiting me from using past history. In the current situation, doing so is very helpful. Of course, if Japan sincerely apologizes and pays compensation, it will be resolved well. That's never going to happen. In the end, this issue will continue to drag on for a while, and this will be beneficial for inter-Korean economic cooperation. How do you see the situation now? Well, it could be just another day like before. Hyunju Nuna crossed her arms and thought for a moment. Then after a while she opened her mouth. Maybe it could be an opportunity to change the order in East Asia. Although Korea has grown enough to rank among the advanced countries, Japan is still far superior to Korea in terms of economic power and international influence. The GDP gap with Japan is still more than 2.5 times. In order to reverse this, Korea's per capita GDP must rise to $80,000. Which is difficult even if there are 10 more companies like OTK Company. However, if you form an economic bloc with other countries, the story is different. Korea is geographically located at the gateway between ASEAN and Central Asia. The problem is that North Korea is blocking the top, but now the problem is showing signs of being resolved. Future growth potential such as seamantium development, semiconductor, battery, automobile, TWR and Vermorpg is also sufficient. If the rapid growth of the Korean economy and the power of OTK company are added to it, can it really change the order in East Asia? After Okazaki came to power, thanks to quantitative easing and the yen, Japanese companies' exports greatly increased, and the Nikkei more than doubled. In response, Prime Minister Okazaki shouted, "Japan is back." But that too is a thing of the past. The stock market crash caused by Kang Jin-ho's sale of Toyota stock continues to this day. The Nikkei index, which was broken by 20,000, showed signs of collapse, far from recovering now even the 15,000 line. Not only because of financial instability, but because the performance of Japanese companies has deteriorated in earnest after the Korea-Japan trade dispute. The bigger problem is that this is just the beginning. Large Korean companies that have joined hands with OTK company are nurturing materials and parts companies based on their enormous profits. It was returning as a blade toward Japan's basic industry. In fact, foreign companies with a large proportion of transactions with OTK companies' subsidiaries gradually increased their transactions with Korean companies, paying attention. Technics went bankrupt and large corporations stumbled. Small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, screamed, urging the government to take action. Under such circumstances, the construction of gas pipelines and railroads on the Korean peninsula, which was carried out through Inter-Korean Economic Cooperation, was another bad news. From the Japanese point of view, it is best not to do it and it should be prevented as much as possible, but if it is something that cannot be prevented anyway, a spoon should be added. However, in order to do so, the claims agreement must first be resolved. However, under such circumstances, Kang Jin-ho made the comfort women issue an international issue. Prime Minister Okazaki sharpened his teeth. Do you mean to undermine Japan's power in East Asia, both politically and economically? If handled incorrectly, Japan could indeed lose influence and be pushed out of Asia. It was expected that even China would step forward and let go of the obstruction, but China was cautious as if to watch the situation a little more. Perhaps this is also because he is watching Kang Jin-ho. Not long ago his goal was to amend the constitution. Now, let alone a constitutional amendment, it is impossible to predict the next general election. I can't believe that one Korean is going to make my head rot like this. Although Japan left the Korean peninsula after the war, the influence of the colonial era still remains and exerts influence on Korean society, including the media, academia, business, politics, and legal circles. Some media wrote articles favorable to Japan, some scholars taught students about colonialism, and some politicians represented Japan's position. Companies are also borrowing Japanese funds and want to access the huge market of Japan. As a result, none of the businessmen were directly hostile to Japan. However, Jin-ho Kang was a completely different existence. What the hell is this guy thinking? What the hell is this guy thinking? Prime Minister Okazaki is tying his head, Chief Cabinet Secretary Shinji Hayashi said. You don't have to worry too much. Aren't you familiar with the habits of Koreans? Habits of Koreans? My grandfather always said, the best way to deal with Koreans is to use Koreans. Chief Cabinet Secretary Shinji Hayashi has a deep relationship with South Korea. His grandfather, who operated a Hayashi coal mine during the Japanese colonial period, made a lot of money by bringing Korean workers to forced labor. It is the Koreans who react when they are suppressed. Giving you what you want will quiet you down, so why do you need to fight? In the past, Japan was able to easily annex Korea because Koreans who wanted it actively helped Japan. Prime Minister Okazaki immediately understood what he was saying. There are many people in the world who put their personal interests ahead of the state. No matter how good the conditions are, will Kang Jin-ho overturn his position and stand on our side? If you do, the honor you've built so far will fall to the bottom. There is no reason for Jin-ho Kang to take such a risk. You don't have to ask for it. It's just that Jin Kong maintains his current stance and turns slightly in the favor of Japan. Investors are chasing after money anyway. Also, isn't Jin Kong not that close with the Korean government? Japan must dig into that gap. Japan has always been a global economic powerhouse. The country's wealth and market size are not comparable to those of Korea. If you want money, give them money. If you want fame, give them honor. What if I could convince Kong Jin-ho to take Japan's side? Then all the problems facing Japan can be solved at once. Prime Minister Okazaki's eyes lit up. I'll have to meet Jin Kong in person and make a deal. An unexpected Korea-Japan summit was held. Prime Minister Okazaki visited Korea, and the leaders of both countries held hands at the Blue House. Until then we had talked briefly when we met at international events. But this is the first time since the trade dispute that began with Japan's export restrictions. As it was the Korea-Japan summit held at a sensitive time, the world's attention was focused. After the first meeting, Prime Minister Okazaki spoke to the press. I had a deep conversation with President Ha Chong-min. The two countries pledged to work closely together on this issue. However, President Ha Chong-min said something completely different. There was a consensus that Korea and Japan should move beyond the past and into the future. This requires an openness to solve the problems of the past first. Korea is ready to join hands at any time. During the summit, Prime Minister Okazaki toured Korean companies and factories and met with Korean businessmen. The first place I visited was the Seosung Electronic Semiconductor Factory. Prime Minister Okazaki admired Korea's semiconductor technology and emphasized cooperation with Japanese companies. It was a rare thing to see before. Taekyu, who was watching the scene on TV, asked, "Is Japan very difficult these days? Are you tired?" After the Korea-Japan trade dispute, exports to Korea declined, many companies turned to deficits and some went bankrupt. As Korean companies keep reducing their income, the Prime Minister is directly involved in sales. Of course, I'm not going to increase my orders again from now on, but still, it might be possible to appeal to Japanese companies that are going bankrupt that the Prime Minister is trying so hard. OTK Company was among the companies that Prime Minister Okazaki visited. Perhaps this is the real purpose. There is nothing I can't meet. I accepted the offer to visit. Taekyu also joined us and we decided to leave the interpretation to team leader Jong Ki-hong. Of course, Prime Minister Okazaki will accompany an interpreter, but it is better to do this to clearly convey our position. Team leader Jong Ki-hong, who heard my story, was startled. Yes. Me. You speak Japanese well. Team leader Jong Ki-hong waved both hands. Ah, no, that's good enough for business. Not enough to interpret for such an important position. This is also a kind of business. Even when I was studying Japanese, I never thought I would be able to interpret the words of the Japanese Prime Minister. Taekyu tapped team leader Jong Ki-hong on the shoulder. No worries. Just do it comfortably as you always do. Shigeru Ong did a good job of interpreting without being nervous. But is Okazaki a problem? Anyone who hears it would know that President Ichikawa is superior to Prime Minister Okazaki. As if Taegyu's words were helpful, team leader Jong Ki-hong nodded his head with a determined expression. Oh, I see. I will do my best. You just have to keep in mind that the future of East Asia and the fate of Korea-Japan relations depend on the team leader's interpretation. Yeah. As it was a visit by the head of the country, bodyguards in suits were deployed around the company for several hours. When the time came, I went out to the front door and black cars lined up in front of the company. Prime Minister Okazaki got out of the car and we smiled and shook hands. Welcome, Prime Minister. Prime Minister Okazaki took my hand. Nice to meet you. Hyo Kong Jin-ho. In the meantime, I've watched the media get tired of it and it must be the same. But this is the first time we've met in person. He looks a lot older than what you see on TV. Wrinkles grew on his face and his hair turned gray. There have been a lot of things that have been bothering me lately. I guided the OTK company and the media captured it on camera. After the company tour we sat down. On our side there are me, Taekyu and 3 team leaders Jong Ki-hong, and on the other side is Prime Minister Okazaki and 2 interpreters. Unlike Korea and the United States, which have adopted a presidential system, Japan is adopting a cabinet system. Due to the nature of the cabinet system, in which the president of the ruling party is the head of the executive branch, there are virtually no restrictions on the number of consecutive terms. He was the longest-serving prime minister after the war. How much longer will he be able to sit there? Prime Minister Okazaki said while drinking tea. I think that CEO Kong Jin who may have a negative perception of Japan. I smiled and shook my head. The Prime Minister seems to have misunderstood something. I don't have any bad feelings about Japan. He is well aware that he is an important economic partner. You recently visited the House of Sharing. Yes. I came here to meet the grandmothers who were forcibly taken as sexual slaves by the Japanese military. It was very heartbreaking that the grandmothers told me they wanted to receive an apology from Japan before they closed their eyes. Prime Minister Okazaki hardened his expression and said, Japan has already apologized several times, and it was irreversibly and finally resolved through the last Comfort Women Agreement. So I don't think it's appropriate to bring up these issues again. In a way, it is Korea that Japan apologized the most. After apologizing in moderation, the problem is that he comes out so shamelessly. The relationship between Korea and Japan is for the politicians of both countries to take care of, so I don't think it's appropriate to comment on that. I am only advising on the North Korea-Japan agreement. Nothing has been resolved between the two countries, so we have to start over. As it is to calculate the amount of compensation for past events, wouldn't it be natural to investigate and publicize what happened in the past? If you want to skip this process, you can pay an apology and the $100 billion in compensation the North Koreans think it is. This is compensation, not grants or loans. And indemnity is money given to the offender to compensate for the damage. Prime Minister Okazaki shook his head. $100 billion is absolutely impossible. I nodded. I understand Japan's position very well. If you understand your position, wouldn't it make sense to offer a realistic amount? That is not something I can decide. I'm just an investor. I'm only advising on negotiations. There is not much I can do other than communicate Japan's position well to the North Korean side. Even if you say this, you will be well aware that I hold the key to the North Korea-Japan negotiations. Prime Minister Okazaki said with a relaxed expression. I came here today because I wanted to request an investment in Japan rather than talking about it. Taekyu showed interest. A sudden investment? I know that Korea has a number of regulations on autonomous driving and ride-sharing. If OTK company enters Japan, the Japanese government would like to loosen these regulations to create an environment where autonomous vehicles can run, and to provide financial support and tax benefits to attract battery and automobile factories. In an instant my ears were persuaded. What do you mean? If we enter Japan, we will lend money with a near-zero interest rate and set the limit and deadline as desired. We will also support related companies in Japan such as OTK Games and Facit. Even if Japan has zero interest rates, borrowing money is subject to interest and limits. However, if you follow this proposal, it is no different than saying that you will write a blank check. Of course, it is not really unlimited, but it is clear that it is an exceptional condition that no company can receive. It's a very good suggestion. We were also very interested in the Japanese market. Prime Minister Okazaki said in a soft voice. I think Japan and OTK company can become each other's wings. Taekyu said excitedly. 5. If you just open up the market, it's good for us. I will go right in. As in any country, the automobile industry is a key industry, and as it has a large impact on the economy, it is protected and nurtured nationally. Of course, there will be no way to just open this market to us by spending taxes. I asked Prime Minister Okazaki, is there anything the Prime Minister wants from me or the OTK company? He had a smile on his lips. First of all, I hope that we can work together to solve the current pile of issues well. Shouldn't we draw a bigger picture together for the development of Japan-Korea relations in the future? I'm talking back, but I understand what you mean. You want me to stand on the Japanese side. Japan has a domestic market with a per capita GDP of $40,000 and a population of over 100 million. If you accept this offer, you can enter this huge market without spending a penny of mine. How much more money can you make in the Japanese market? When I hear the Prime Minister's words, there are people that come to mind. Who are you? I asked with a smile. Did you know that Yul Seo-jak and Jeong Machuljiak? Or Lee Won-young or Min Byung-suk? Prime Minister Okazaki's expression hardened at my words. In any country, people who betrayed the country and people of their birth are called maikuno. They must have received such an offer from Japan too. In return for selling their country to Japan, the slaves enjoyed wealth and glory for the rest of their lives. But I am different from them. I am not trying to say that I love the country and the people more or that I am just. The biggest difference between me and maikuno is. I looked straight at him and said, I have a lot of money. Taekyu nodded his head for nothing. A lot of money. There are so many goddamn things that we don't even have to sell the country.